Our hair is always changing. Our body's always changing. Nature's changing. The grass is changing. The seasons are changing. Our relationships are changing. Our emotions are changing. Our thoughts are changing. Everything in this physical world is changing. And then there's the one thing that is.
Hello and welcome to Finding Your Spark Again. I am so glad you're here with us. Today, my guest, Joyce Stone, bestselling author, soul connection coach, certified in positive psychology and yoga psychology, will share with us exactly how you move forward. Welcome, Joy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm really glad to have you here. And I have to say, I don't curse too often on the podcast, but I am a real cursor. Like when people aren't around, I'm a cursor. And so I found in some of your material a reference to fear, more faith, right? So today we're going to call it forget fear. But I think that word that I'm not really saying on here is really important, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So I love that there's this encapsulation in some of your material about really saying, I'm not doing that anymore, and this is how I'm going to move forward. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that with you.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think because every single person on the planet deals with fear, and we have to find a way to move through it and not let it be something that stops us, you know?
Yeah, that's right. And it is built into our makeup. It's part of our brain and it's there for us. We benefit from it all the time. Very important when you're walking along a bridge that you have fear of the edge, right? Uh, but not necessarily so important when it tells us that we're tired and we're overrun and we're overwhelmed and we don't have space for it and it's not going to work out anyway. And so tell me a little bit about how that manifests in your clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people come to either reach out to me because they have done all the things to work on the fear or to work on themselves, as if they have to be rid of this fear or this thing that shows up for them. But what I believe and what happened for me and what I find happens for my clients is that thing that we think is the problem that's causing the fear or is manifesting as the fear is the thing, like you said, that we have to really begin to listen to, because it has incredible wisdom and feedback for us to actually rise above or expand or evolve or move forward. For me, it was years and years and years of anxiety. I grew up with a lot of anxiety, diagnosed with all the things, and with in terms of anxiety, the social anxieties, the general anxiety, the PTSD. And I spent so much time fixated on that problem that I actually didn't get to know the power of myself. And once I recognized, and this is what I help my clients with, is to see that fear is really feedback. It's not anything we're going to get rid of. Like you said, it moves through all of us, even the great sages, even the greatest teachers in the world have fear. So how do we use it, navigate it as a tool for our expansion versus something that distracts us and stops us? And so that's what I begin to help people with.
Well, I love that you bring up this idea of anxiety because I think a lot of times people do not associate anxiety and fear. They think I'm a little anxious. I mean, maybe you could kind of call it fear, but they don't think about, and we're not really taught to think about what are the roots of these low grade feelings that we're having, these feelings that are not stopping our lives, but are difficult and maybe sometimes a little bit in the way, but they're not so overwhelming that we have to go seek help. Even though maybe we should, right? But um and so those feelings, they all have roots. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about anxiety and how that looks. What is it that we look for when we go like, oh, that's fear?
I wrote a book called If I'm So Spiritual, Why Am I Still So Anxious? And my anxiousness and the anxiousness that I encounter with women and men is it is fear. It's fear is the exact definition of anxiety. So the root cause of anxiety out of the philosophy that I teach, especially through the spiritual lens, is that it's disconnection from self. So anxiety is causing us to seek our security, to seek our okayness, to seek our certainty in something that is always changing, which is the outer world. And so the more that we seek our security, our safety, our sense of self out in a world that's constantly changing, that really is giving us back what we actually already think, believe, and feel. It's a reflection of what's going on inside of us. The more often that we get disconnected from that sense of who we are at a soul level. And so that confidence, that freedom, that joy, that peace, that security, that certainty that we're seeking is something that's already in us. So to me, when I started to realize that I was living in so much anxiety and fear because I didn't really trust myself and I didn't really know myself and I didn't really know how to, like, I wasn't focused on building up my confidence, my peace, my freedom, my sense of who I am and who I want to be in this world, how I want to show up in my relationships. I was more just hoping that if I could manage and navigate this fear, that magically all of those things would change. So anxiety is fear. That is the definition of it. It's a sense of fear. It's a sense of, you know, either something is lacking. Like I know for me, when I was really deep in my anxiety, there was always this sense of lack. I'm not enough. There's not enough love in the world. There's not enough attention from people. They're getting attention, so I don't have attention. They like that person, so they probably don't love like me. There's just this sense of lack. There's also a lot of negative thinking. So when we think about anxiety, it's a lot of negative thoughts that anchor us more in fear or separation from self. And there's a lot of need for control and trying to control the things that, again, are very often very hard to control because it's coming from that outside in. But when we can learn to control our sense of self and what we're thinking, believing, and feeling, then we can have more faith and move forward. So fear is anxiety. That's what it is at its essence.
I love that you're talking about this in terms of, um, the phrase that we're talking about, forget fear, more faith. That F word at the beginning there, that is really expulsive, right? It really just clears the decks. And what one thing you just said is joy and confidence and ease and fun and playfulness and all of those things that we want, happiness, right, are in us. They're in us. And that is absolutely my experience with myself and with my clients, is that if we can push everything away a little bit, then what's there in that nothing is the joy that we're seeking. And so we're in this whole other relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, the lens that I look through too is one that is more of the spiritual lens that comes out of yoga psychology. And there's so many ways to look at life. There's so many paths and maps. But one of the things I love about this lens is that the very first teaching of yoga psychology, which yoga psychology does not have to do with the poses, it's about our mind. It's about understanding who we are on a deep level. It's about helping us overcome the things that block us from being free. And the first teaching is that if you knew who you really are, if you understand yourself at your essence, you would not suffer. That suffering is mind created. And truly, anxiety is mind created, unless we are being chased by a tiger, unless we actually are in a very scary situation. Then, of course, in the moment, our body is producing something to try to get us out of that situation. But otherwise, if I'm not in the situation that gave me anxiety or fear at one time in my life, maybe somebody said something and I negative to me and I thought, oh, I should never speak up again because I had someone said that wasn't good for me to speak up, or you should be quiet, or what do you know? We have these associations. Well, now in the moment that I'm living in, my mind and body has organized itself in a way to see present moment through that lens. So all of it's mind created. It's not happening in the moment now. And so that's where anxiety arises out of the ego mind, this brain that's constantly changing, this mind that wants to tell me who I am based on other people's experiences of me, other people's approval. And that's just not the truth of who I am. So the more that I can get identified with who I really am at that soul level, which is just as real as the part of me I can see in the mirror, but we're not taught to know this part of ourselves. So again, it's this cycle. We tend to seek, okay, maybe I'll get more security in the next job or in the next relationship or in the next house, or it goes on. And then we find ourselves back in that same spot until we take care of that separation from self and that true soul identity. I think then we can find that inner peace, because it is there.
It is there. It's the only place it really is, isn't it? So, can we talk a little bit about what faith is?
So and this will come out of so I realized, let me share a personal story about faith in the sense of what I mean by this. So in 2012, I was studying with a teacher that was going back and forth to India, and he was studying the Yoga Sutra. And again, the Yoga Sutra is a book of psychology. It's a spiritual kind of psychology that helps us to know ourselves. And up until this point in 2012, I had done everything. I had done everything. Like, I had done therapy, I had done, the energy healings, I had done retreats, I had done yoga, I had done meditation, I had all the tools in my toolbox. I was wearing my mala beads, I had my essential oils. We get a lot in our toolbox trying to work on the fear. And I realized in 2012, when I was working with him, it was like I was learning that, wait a minute, yoga, real healing comes from recognizing that you are whole and complete. What healing really is to be made whole in your mind, like you understand your wholeness. So, what I had realized in 2012 is that I had been spending all of my time, not consciously doing this, but all of my time working on being less anxious or less afraid, and not learning how to have faith, which is belief in myself and belief that life is safe. It's a sense that I believe. So it says, like, even in spiritual teachings, if we look through the realm of, like, say, Jesus, right? Like, there's so many different teachers. Even Jesus said, seek and you shall receive according to your faith, according to your belief. So understanding that what I believe is what I'm receiving. What I believe is what I'm getting back. So I'm always getting what I have faith in. I'm always experiencing what I have faith in. And I started to realize this. I was like, wait, I have such faith. I have such belief that if I say something, someone's going to think, oh, I sound stupid. Or if I, set a boundary and say no, someone's going to be mad at me. That's faith. It's not faith like in necessarily even a higher power per se. There's different levels of faith. But to me, faith is belief in what it is I want to experience, not in what it is that I don't want to experience. So that was the big distinction for me, is, can I actually start to have faith in myself? And I'm going to just say this, fast forward to when I spent 6 months studying with a woman named Marianne Williamson, and she wrote a book called A Return to Love. And I was in a mastermind with her. And there was a woman in there in our mastermind, and she was sharing about some of the traumas she had had in her life. And these were like little, there's the bigger T traumas we talk about and the little T ones, but she was talking about some of her smaller issues that were like keeping her from showing up in her fullest expression of herself. And I remember Marianne Williamson said to her in that moment, she said, when are you going to decide that life is safe? When are you going to decide that it's okay to be you? And it was like, wow, that really hit me in my whole body, because I was like, yeah, faith is a decision. Faith is a focus. Faith is looking at the target. Faith is knowing you have a destination. Faith is knowing you have a purpose. Faith is knowing you belong, more than you're letting your mind think you don't, or knowing, all those kind of thoughts that come up. But just managing the negative thoughts is not the same thing as building faith or belief or trust in yourself and life. And that's where I had to make that big distinction, and it changed my whole life.
I love that. Now, you made reference to making a decision. Uh, and my experience is that when we talk about things, we talk about them in short words, right? We go like, "Yep, I just made a choice," and then in reality, behind that is a process. It's an unraveling process. Every time I have had some miraculous breakthrough, and I think about that in the moment, and I think, oh yeah, that was, a miracle 10 years in the making, right? That was me getting ready, getting ready, getting ready, getting ready, not knowing that I was ready, but keep moving in that direction, right? Keep practicing that faith. And then all of a sudden you're in a different place and you go like, yep, I just decided. And so I'd love to talk about kind of what that process is between the fear and the faith and this concept of security. I talk to people a lot about creating security in risky situations, right? Sometimes I work with people in the financial industry, people in medical industry and dentistry and things like that. And fear is a really big issue for how do we move forward with getting our teeth fixed, and how do we move forward with the best investments that we could possibly make without being ruled by an emotion that is seriously in our way of our goals. And so I'd love to talk about this role that security plays in that fear and faith and the movement between the two.
So the way that I look at this is, and we kind of have to step back and put this in context in terms of, and again, I'm going to look through this lens because that is the lens that I teach through, is the yoga psychology and the soul psychology. So if we look at, there are two realities, and it doesn't matter. We can look at this through science too. This is kind of what we know now. So there's two realities. There's the world that we see through our senses. There's that which is always changing. So we could look at, our hair is always changing, our body's always changing, nature's changing, the grass is changing, the seasons are changing, our relationships are changing, our emotions are changing, our thoughts are changing. Everything in this physical world is changing. And then there's the one thing that is not changing. There is the one thing, and that is our true self. That is what we could say is our confidence, our freedom, our joy. The essence, the power within us. There is that stability within us that is unchanging. So there's the changing and there's the changeless. And this is important because what we have been doing since we've been little is we've been conditioned to try to get our security from something that is always changing, which is the physical world, which is my thoughts, which is my relationships. So, which is everything that I just explained. So if I'm trying to get my security from something that's always changing, I'm always going to be chasing it. And we know now, even science says that our happiness is not going to come from the temporary, because again, it's changing and we adapt. So just to understand that, wait a minute, I can enjoy those things. I can navigate those things. I can get pleasure from life. Life is a gift. But to really navigate life and to go take risk in my life and to not identify myself, say, with my job. So if I want to change my job, or I need to change a relationship, or I need to make some changes in my life, if I'm so identified with that role or that thing that's always changing, it's going to be harder to have faith to do a new action or to take a new step or to make a new choice. So I have to step back and recognize who I am. So the faith comes when I can actually see myself from a bigger picture and decide that I'm going to know that my security comes from within me, and that's something that carries with me no matter what happens, no matter what's going on. So being willing to be uncomfortable obviously is part of it as well. But I think that's a really big distinction that we have to understand first and foremost, is that we're not going to get our security from the changing world. We're going to keep chasing it, chasing it, chasing it. So to navigate that, and then I can pause there for a moment. I know that was a long answer, but I want to also make sure that we talk about that gap between the faith and the fear and how we actually navigate that. But I need to make sure that we see that, because that's so important, because many people are walking around not even recognizing, I didn't for a long time, that there were these two sort of like realities. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. I study with a man in India who teaches Gyan Yoga, and these concepts are pervasive in Gyan Yoga as well. It's really the yoga of knowing yourself, right? And how you know yourself is very similar to the way that you just described it. And so I feel like you've done a very good job of letting our listeners know that there are these two spaces, and that one is what I typically on this podcast talk about in terms of what is inside you, right? It's not quite accurate, but it's very close to accurate. It feels like it's inside you. Let's put it that way. And and so yeah, I feel like probably our listeners are up to speed with us here. So you wanted to talk about navigating the space between fear and faith. And before we go there, let me just say about security. I love that you're drawing a line between feeling secure, which is a feeling that we have, right? And that line being drawn directly to that being an internal knowledge that I am secure because I know me, not I am secure because I know the world. And that's massively different. So, yeah, so let's talk about navigating that space between the two.
Yeah, I think when we do understand this, and I think we all are on the same page here, is that then it gives us, like I said, that freedom to go play and to go explore and to have a different experience, a more expansive experience, because we aren't so identified with all those roles. So one of the ways that I navigate this is, and you talked about making a decision. Making a decision is going to be really important in terms of navigating fear, is knowing that we're not going to go back and forth, that we are going to make a decision. So, for example, I remember, and this is a silly example, but this is a tangible way to look at this, is many, many years ago, almost 2 decades ago now, I was a yoga teacher. So for 10 years, I taught yoga classes in Los Angeles, starting in 2005. And when I started doing this, I left my corporate job to do this. I left my career. I had a big career. I was in sales and marketing with Fairmont Hotels, Expedia. But somewhere in my soul, I was like, I really desire to do this new thing. And so I went off on this whole new path. And every time I would get up in front and to teach a yoga class, fear would arise. I would have all this fear about, oh my God, people are judging me. What am I doing? This is silly. Like, I'm not good at this. Even though in my soul, this was something I wanted to do. So I did not want that fear to deter me or to stop me. So I made a decision that I was going to practice and believe that when I got up on that to teach, that people were happy to see me, that people were excited about this class, that people wanted to be here, that they were connecting with me. And this is important because our mind is always creating our reality. So again, how I'm feeling is what I'm experiencing, and that's going to greatly affect my actions. So this sounds simple, but because my brain was so wired into getting my security from how other people were perceiving me, so much so that it would dictate like my actions in my life, that I had to every single day, there's like this process which is called tapas. So every single day I would say, okay, what does confidence look like? Because this was my new practice. If I'm deciding that I'm going to do this thing, and I'm deciding that this is what I want, and I'm deciding that I'm going to believe in myself, I'm deciding that this is going to feel good, I'm deciding that I'm going to feel, strong about this. So I would every day look at my journal and I'd say, okay, how does someone that's confident, how do they show up in this? How do I know there's people, I have role models, there's people I observe. How does someone who appears totally confident do this? And so I would start to practice embodying. Well, that's how they do it. They look people in the eye, they speak slowly, they stand tall with their shoulders back, they breathe a certain way. And we have to practice embodying this new version of ourselves so that we're almost like wiring in something new. Now, every time I would do this, of course, there would be feedback. Of course, the anxiety would show up, or the fear or the doubt would show up. And that became my new food. That became my reflection. So instead of falling into it, or instead of letting it take over, I would reflect on it. Like I said at the beginning of our conversation, fear is feedback. All of this stuff that's coming up isn't just noise in my head, it's valuable information showing me where I am in relationship to myself and my goals and my dreams. So I started to look at that and go, okay, what is this doubt about? And why is it so? I'm curious about why it's so hard for me to get up there and to feel so good about myself. And just getting curious about that new food, about the feedback from my action I was taking based on my decision. And then I would practice the third component, which is just surrender. I would say, okay, this is not mine to carry around anymore. this doesn't fit into the version of myself that I want to be. I've used this beating myself up long enough. I've let doubt be the thing that protected me for long enough, and I'm going to let it go. Or maybe there was a story that someone told me when I was younger. Maybe there was something I heard from a parent that needed to let go, that needs to go. So there is a process to it, but it comes from deciding, and decision means to cut off from the old. That when I decide something, it's a commitment, which is different than being interested in something. It's actually, I'm committing to this for myself. I'm having faith in my goal. I'm focused on it, I'm embodying it, and I'm going through this process of doing that new behavior, reflecting on what worked, what didn't work, what felt good, what didn't feel good, and why, and then surrendering what is no longer mine and repeating that until it takes root. But that is a commitment. It doesn't happen magically, and it doesn't happen if we're not really, really focused and really, really intent and have an intention with it. And so for me, that is the process. I mean, we can talk about that for hours, but that was simply just one example. That was really a simple example.
That's great. I wish that we had hours to talk about all of this, but we do not. So, I know time goes quickly here. I would like to just ask you, do you feel like there's anything about this topic that you would like to talk about before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think just what we said, I think it's really important that everyone knows, and knowing at a real deep level, that fear is natural. Fear is not going away. And so instead of analyzing our fear or focusing on the problem, is recognizing and just seeing it, but putting your attention and your focus and your energy into what it is you want to be, who it is you want to be, what it is you want to experience. We don't have to spend years of our life analyzing and working on ourselves. We actually get to become who our soul is here to be and who we know in our heart we want to be. And those are two very different paths. So to find a way to build that new path versus constantly analyzing the one that doesn't feel good.
Let us all know how we can get in touch with you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Joystone Coaching, or you can listen to my podcast. I have a podcast called Wake Up with Joy Stone, or at joystonecoaching.com.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I want to remind everybody that you can always go to donnalynn.blog and pick up your copy of Unbreakable Guide. That's right. It is the guide to becoming unbreakable. So there's great tools in there and frameworks, and the things that you've heard today are absolutely referenced within that document. So go and take a look at that and see how it impacts your overwhelm and your state of being. I'll see you next time.